The vision encapsulates the core mandate of the leg and provides a good framing for the support to the LDCs. These are just some of the tracking and monitoring progress in formulating and implementing NAPs that the leg has provided in support. So progress reports as well as gaps and needs, guidelines and publications, training on NAPs, NAP Expos, NAP Implementation Pipeline Development Initiative, as well as accessing funds, LDC roster, and as mentioned before, the NAP subgroups that has been established. Recently, the leg has published new types of guidelines as well as books to help LDCs as well as other countries in formulating their NAPs. If you go to to our website at the NAP website, you'll find these publications as seen here. The NAP Progress Report, the mapping of available adaptation finance, as well as others seen on the screen. So as of now, the status of the NAPs within the LDCs, there are 23 out of the 46 LDCs which have submitted their NAPs. 15 LDCs are still in the process of formulating their NAPs, as well as 7 LDCs have not yet initiated the process to formulate their NAPs, and 2 have yet not provided an update on progress for their NAPs. Next, the leg has been mandated to consider the following: the gaps and the needs related to the process to formulate and implement NAPs. The leg has been compiling the gaps and needs in its publications, and also identifies how the gaps and needs are being addressed through the ongoing work of the leg, as well as the Adaptation Committee and other bodies within the UNFCCC process. These are the areas of gaps identified, as well as the support activities that help address these gaps. I'm sure this presentation is available, so you can go into more detail at a later time. Next, the leg has developed the NAP technical guidelines for NAPs and is currently working on drafting implementation guidelines for NAPs. The leg also takes note of ongoing efforts by different organizations in developing supplements to the technical guidelines, as well as all supplementary material. This is the website, the napcentral.org website, where you can find all these NAP materials as well as technical guidelines to help formulate your NAPs. The leg has been working on training on NAPs within countries, as well as workshops and trainings provided. There's several trainings that has been provided for leg in different regions, as well as NAP Expos, as well as in the Anglophone Africa, Francophone Africa, as well as Latin Caribbean, and the Pacific region as well. So the highlight from 10 years of NAP Expos, there has been over 8 global NAP Expos since 2013, and several regional NAP Expos for Africa, Latin, Asian, Pacific. The NAP Expos have been main global adaptation spaces, bringing together key actors and stakeholders. At its 58th session, the SBI acknowledged the NAP Expo provided valuable technical insights into the entire adaptation cycle, notably the implementation stage. So at the moment, one of the direct country support being provided by the leg is the NAP Implementation Pipeline Development Initiative. This initiative aims to support the LDCs in increasing its project ideas and developing them into concept notes for submission to different funding entities such as the GCF, LDCF, as well as the Adaptation Fund. At the moment, there has been 4 NAP writing workshops conducted since 2022, as well as a compilation of project ideas arising from this NAP implementation pipeline development, which is also available at the NAP Central website. Especially accessing funding for NAPs is a real gap for LDCs that the leg has noted. So there has been several collaborations with the GCF and Jeff, as well as the Adaptation Fund to engage this type of gap. So there has been engagement in leg meetings, GCF sessions, as well as GCF engagement at writing workshops, and regular dialogues at SB sessions, as well as the COPs. Also, the leg, as mentioned before, we have a roster of experts within the NAPs to help with the NAPs. The leg created and maintained this roster of national regional experts from LDCs to support formulation and implementation. Myself, I think this roster is very beneficial towards us LDCs because the roster of experts are taken from our regional zones, and they know the background as well as especially the challenges that we face within each region. Currently, there are 39 experts on the roster, which also include present and former leg members. This can also be found on the NAP Central website. I think we'll go into more detail of the NAP technical working groups, but just the overview of the 4 technical working groups that are under the leg right now. The first one is the NAP Technical Guidelines Working Group. Second, NAP Implementation Support Working Group. Third, NAP Tracking. And the fourth is the Multi-Stakeholder Forum Working Group. The key deliverables that the leg has planned for 2024 are as listed on the screen. We plan to enhance the NAP Central, more data and information tools for LDCs, not only LDCs, but other countries who wish to use the NAP Central network, assessments and progress in formulation of the implementation of NAPs, our 2024 progress report, technical guidelines, other publications, as well as updated M&E tools, NAP writing workshops in Africa, plus Haiti, Asia, and the Pacific, as well as the NAP Expo 2024. Finally, the way forward that the leg sees at the moment, we encourage countries to submit their NAPs. We're trying to encourage more countries to submit their NAPs as well as other related outputs as soon as possible. And the NAPs must translate into implementation, concrete adaptation projects, capacity building readiness, and ongoing process to support the formulation implementation of NAPs. And finally, the leg will continue to provide technical guidance and support to LDCs as well as other groups on the process to formulate and implement NAPs. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much, Jami, for providing this key highlight and milestone of what we are doing as leg, of course, in supporting the LDCs countries, in making sure that they all have their NAP, because that's the vision. The vision is to see that all of the LDC have their NAPs, and also that they are implementing their adaptation priorities, capturing their NAPs. So without colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I can now turn to our colleague from the Adaptation Committee, Madam Rosa Morales, at least to present on the Adaptation Committee Task Force on NAPs. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. I would like first to thank the LEC for the work they have been doing, and of course for the conjoint work that we have been doing with the Adaptation Committee, and also to the Secretariat to support this work. So I'm going to tell you about the work that we've been doing regarding the task force on national adaptation plans. We have been seeing that for the LEC, this is the main work that they have been doing, that they have presented us. So let's see how this is also being addressed in other spaces. So this task force was established in 2013 in the fourth meeting of the Adaptation Committee with the objective to further support developing countries on their NAP formulation and implementation, which we understand is very important. And of course, this has to do also with the objective of the Adaptation Committee. And this task force will also have the objective to bridge between the constituted bodies working on adaptation and to move forward in an informed and coherent manner. And this is one of the main objectives of the Adaptation Committee itself. And all of this regarding the supporting of developing countries in their national adaptation planning. Originally, the members of this task force were, of course, the AC, the LEG, the SEF, you know, the ones that have to do with finance, with technology, and the financial institutions also of the convention, the Adaptation Fund, the GEF, and the GCF. And afterwards, there was also a welcome as contributors to other interested adaptation-related constituted bodies. For instance, the CGE, the WIM, the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform, and the Paris Capacity Building body. The activities of this task force have been addressed in 3 work plans, and the last one, the flexible work plan for 22 to 24, includes activities related to identifying synergies, awareness raising and outreach, as well as technical support and guidance on adaptation planning and implementation, and of course, on reviewing subnational, national, and overall adaptation progress of countries. Regarding the recent activities, we would like to highlight 2 of them. One has to do with a policy brief, which is on progress, good practices, and lessons learned in prioritizing and incorporating gender-responsive adaptation action. This has been published a few weeks ago. And this policy brief includes information and relevant case studies for each element of the adaptation cycle on the way that governments are advancing gender equality and empowering women through adaptation policies. Another recent activity is the dialogue on addressing capacity gaps in accessing adaptation fund, which is very much related on what have been presented before. There has been a first part of this dialogue, and there will also be a second part of it early next year. In the first part, the adaptation-related constituted bodies that I mentioned before presented the relevant activities and discussed on how they can assist in addressing and identifying capacity gaps in accessing the funding in a synergized and coherent manner. And so this first part was within the constituted bodies of the convention. But the second part of the dialogue would like to go to a broader audience. For instance, of course, the constituted bodies, relevant agencies, donors, the Nairobi Work Program partners, parties, and observers. So the objective is to encourage a more open discussion on how to further enhance developing countries' capacities on the matter. So for the activities planned for 2024, there would be, they are under the flexible work plan that I mentioned before. So the task force will continue its work on addressing gaps and needs in the formulation and implementation of the NAPs, prepare a policy brief on progress, good practice, and lessons learned, challenges, opportunities in the application of traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples, and local knowledge systems in adaptation in collaboration with the local communities and indigenous peoples platform. Its working group, of course. Contribute to the mandated NAP review to take place in 2024 in collaboration with the LEG, precisely, and support the AC in designing and delivering an and a NAP Expo event to understand and strengthen the engagement of the private sector in adaptation. In closing, I would like to say a few words on a recent work that we've been developing within the AC. It is a portal, an interactive portal with country profiles that will showcase the state of adaptation action in each of the countries that are part to the convention. The country profiles will provide information on adaptation action undertaken along the adaptation cycle, and is going to be based on the latest information available in national reports, such as NDCs and NAPs, and of course the communications. So we see that this portal, as being a unique central access point for information, will enhance the collective understanding of adaptation action, facilitate the recognition of adaptation efforts, and stimulate learning and further action, and also enable the tracking of adaptation progress globally. This tool will also support the task force to identify good practices that are relevant to support countries in the development and implementation of their NAPs. The profiles will be launched early next year, but we have a preview that is already available on our webpage. Here you have a view, snapshot of how the portal would look like. And it's going to be, as I mentioned before, interactive, and we hope that this will help the understanding of the needs of developing countries. Here you have some access entries to hear from you, and I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Yes, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Rosa, for providing the highlights of what the task force is doing, and also the plan you have for 2024. So at this juncture, I think we can now open the floor for any questions, clarifications, or any remarks or reflection. We can take 2 for now. Okay, yes, please. So you can state your name and then the country you're coming from or your organization here.
Thank you very much. My name is Kofi Kumasi. I'm coming from Togo, from Sustainable Solution for Africa. I have 2 quick questions. The first one, in his statement, Mr. Jami said the presentations are available, so I will let you know where we can find them. For more insight. And the second one also is related to Mr. Jami's presentation. How can we access the roster of experts that is available to help countries in the development of their NAPs? Because my organization, which is a consulting firm, we are supporting countries in the development of their NAPs. Especially we have supported Niger in the development of his NAP, and currently we are supporting Tunisia in the same process. So we would like to know how can we access to the rest of experts. And I will close with this question, maybe a general. Is there any perspective to update the NAP guideline, technical guidelines? Because we can see that with the AR6, there are some new orientations as regards the climate change vulnerability assessment methodology. So I would like to know if there is any perspective to update the NAP guideline or to develop a supplemental guideline in order to highlight these new orientations from the ARCs of IPCC. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We can take the last one. Okay, we have two.
Good afternoon. My name is Miguel Galante. I am from Portugal, from the Camões Institute, the Portuguese Development Cooperation Agency. And well, firstly, I would like to acknowledge the work that you have developed. As you've shown in the presentations, you developed plenty of work. Even so, there is a gap. And I would like to ask if you have plans to develop work specifically on the Lusophone LDCs countries. Because I realize that you have developed work on the Francophone, on the Anglophone, but not on the Portuguese. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we can take the last one from our colleague from NAP Global Network.
Thanks, Lecturer, and congrats to the Secretariat and the Lecturer and the AC for the work that you're doing. My name is Orville Gray on behalf of the NAP Global Network. What I want to follow up on is a little bit of clarity with respect to the NAP review that should be coming up for, I think, next, submissions are due by next February. In terms of when the synthesis report will be produced and whether or not this will feed in terms of the assessment that's coming out of that, will we have that in time for the first leg meeting of 2024? And how will the working groups fit into that picture in terms of supporting that process before we get into the SBs in May or June of next year? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I can get now to my colleague, Jamie, and then also to Rosa. Jamie, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I think on the first question, thank you for the question from my colleague from Togo. The presentation can actually be accessed on the Leg Side event website. After this, I think it will be made available by the Secretariat. On the second question on the roster of experts, as I mentioned, you can access it on the NAP Central website. But if you would like to apply to be a roster of expert, you would have to get in touch with the LEG Secretariat, and I think there's a process to accredit you as an expert. On the Portuguese guidelines, I think I have to refer back to my chair. I'm not too sure about that, but I'll leave the other questions to you. Thank you.
Okay.
I think the questions were only for you.
Yes, I think the questions we have for the leg, and thank you very much, and Jamie, for that. So I think I'll start with Alvi on the NAP review. Of course, definitely, from the work of the leg, we'll make sure that this has to form part of the milestone we want to achieve. And definitely we'll have to design in such a way that it can fit to the reporting period. So from your end, of course, for the technical subgroup, we'll try to see the one that align with a particular subgroup, and then we'll make sure that we work on the plans to achieve most of the thing. And then for the Portuguese, yes, I can say it's well noted from the side of the leg. But what we've been doing as a kind of like an experience here, normally when we do our training, and we also have some LDC countries that are also speak Portuguese. So we have leg members that normally do the translations in most of what we are doing. And then also sometimes you also have like simultaneous translation. But what in all the work we are doing, making sure that no LDC is left behind. And also have even a country dialogue program where in the leg itself we engage with countries directly to see what are the gaps and then how we could support them, I think, going forward. Yeah.
No, sorry, cannot take any more questions.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Just to add to the point that you made, from the perspective of the NAP Global Network, just for the Chair to be aware that we are available and willing to support, if necessary, with respect to the translation into Portuguese as it relates to the NAP work. Thanks.
Okay. So thank you very much. I think we're trying to work within time. So thank you very much. I think we also give a round of applause for our first panelist. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So now we can now go to the second session that has to do panel discussions. As you rightly heard from my colleague, leg member, we have technical subgroups, of course, that help in our work. So with that, in order for us to expand the technical support in the process to formulate and implement NAPs, most of us are aware that the COP26 invited us, the leg, to create technical subgroups to build on the experience and success of the NAP technical working group. So the leg established 4 subgroups in 2022. These include the NAP technical guidelines, the NAP implementation support, and the NAP tracking, and then also the multi-stakeholder forum. So for this session, because of time, we'll try to see how we can discuss on 3 subgroups. If we still have time, we can, of course, definitely discuss on all of the subgroups and what we are doing. So at this juncture, I want to call on, of course, Paul Disanka to join me on the stage. That is also going to share some light on what we are doing as far as NAP tracking is concerned for the implementation subgroups. And also we have countries here that are also going to share their experience in the implementation of NAPs. I have a colleague here, Joseph Binji from Zambia. He can also join us here. And also our colleague from Bhutan, and Tanzi Kolo. So with that, let me start with the NAP tracking subgroup, of course, which have been supporting the work on tracking and monitoring progress in formulation and implementation of NAPs. And it deals with the methodology for measuring outcomes and impact of adaptation, and also capturing broad best practices and lessons learned in the adaptation through NAPs. So the subgroups have been working on developing matrices to assess the outcome and impact of adaptation. With that, we have Paul Disanka from the Secretariat, who also tried to share some key highlights on that. Paul, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Good evening, colleagues, and I'm happy to see old friends and new ones. I'm speaking because the colleagues from the leg that lead on this work are not available for this. But I'll talk about the work that we've been supporting the leg in tracking progress on NAPs over the last 7 years or so. We don't have too much time, so I'll try not to go over materials that we have covered in the past, but rather perhaps provoke some reactions from you in terms of where this work should go. So we have a tool called PEG M&D tool that we have been using to develop sort of track NAPs over the last 7-8 years. I'll come back to this in a minute. We've also been involved with the Adaptation Committee on the adequacy effectiveness of adaptation and adaptation support. This work has been going on for the last 3 or so years. And then we have this subgroup that has met a number of times leading up to this session here. And work continues perhaps to expand on the tool to develop a newer version that expands coverage from looking at inputs, process, and outputs to kind of venture into the outputs and outcomes and impact of adaptation efforts through NAPs and then more broadly in the countries. So looking ahead, we'll be coming up perhaps with the second version of the tool and maybe some training activities during the next NAP Expo, hopefully around April of next year. Just to remind you, the leg has been producing this progress report on NAPs every year. This is the latest version. And the table on the right, rather the diagram on the right, it used to be a table 1 with all the measures and metrics. But now we've kind of transferred it into a diagram that basically shows a number of critical measures on how to assess progress on NAPs. I know you can't read the detail, but it's perhaps a provocation for you to look at the publication on the website. But this covers mostly inputs, outputs, and process type metrics and measures. The challenge, as we all know, is how do we move from this into capturing the outcomes of all of these efforts especially given that we're now 10 years plus into the NAP work. This is a diagram some of you may have seen. Basically, it shows how adaptation is framed under the Convention on Paris Agreement, where we have the COP and CMA on the far right, and number one, that gives instructions or guidance to a number of entities, the financial mechanism to parties in terms of guidance as to how and what they should be doing, constituted bodies like ourselves, and then the various UN organizations and agencies, et cetera, in terms of what they could do to help support NAPs and adaptation. And the thing in the box on the right-hand side is what happens at the national level. So the activities that are funded through funding from the Convention on Paris Agreement versus activities that the country is doing on its own, all of that constitute the adaptation effort of the country. The challenge is then is how do you measure success of all of that effort? How do you attribute outcomes from the activities that are funded through this financial mechanism support, and so forth. So it's not a small task. I know that the work on M&E has been going on for the last 15 years. I think if I go back to the huge piles of papers in my office, I usually come across materials from an event that would have been organized 10, 12 years ago, talking about how do we measure adaptation success and so forth. So it's an ongoing problem. The challenge is how do we make progress? This is now a same type of information, but shown in a sequence of 8 steps. So the far left is the COP and CMA. The far right are the beneficiaries on the ground for which activities are trying to influence. So you can see there's quite a rich set of steps from the COP to the financial mechanism to the IAs, to the NDAs or focal points at the national level that then work with government planners to develop projects, that work with project developers, that work with executing agencies, and at the end of that are the people in the communities and the villages that hopefully benefit from all of this effort. How do we measure success in all of this? That's the challenge that we face, I think, in terms of how do we measure adaptation. So this is my last slide. So a number of observations, hopefully to prompt you into perhaps providing inputs and some insights as to what would be useful. Adaptation has been said to be complex. As a reason perhaps to say it's too complicated, we can't measure it or define it. But we're finding that perhaps we can unpack it a little bit. We can narrate what adaptation means in a different context. And then that helps us to discover and test out various ways of developing metrics and indicators. Adaptation itself has multiple contexts. It's a process, like the process of developing plans and all of that stuff, an outcome in terms of what the final outcome should be of the effort. It can be an adjustment, adjusting how you do things. It can be a transformation where you essentially decide to stop one activity and transform to something else. All of these lead to a different thought process in terms of how to unpack it and then develop measures of success. So our approach is to describe these various contexts and then go from there and expand and develop metrics, as opposed to trying to find that magic number that you can wave and say, GDP is the answer to measuring adaptation or whatever. So it's a number of different types of measures based on the context. But we're also in a period of change. As we know, temperature is still increasing, climate change is increasing. It's going to continue for the next 30, 40 years. We're kind of predetermined, regardless of the success of mitigation. So adaptation cannot be viewed as an outcome totally, because the conditions are still in transition, so to speak. So we have to look at how do we measure and represent that dynamic and ever-changing set of conditions. So you can almost think of perhaps metrics that are vectors. So vector has a direction and of course a slope, as opposed to singular numbers that represent success. Adaptation is also not unique. Most of the things that we do as adaptation are very identical to development activities. But it's the context and the motivation for doing it that translates that action into an adaptation. So in that sense, we have a lot to learn from what we've been doing in development for the last decades and so forth. So we have to see what do we learn from how things are done, but rather also apply it to the new context of climate change. There's also quite the diagrams I showed have a mix of mostly political and policy type issues that eventually translate into technical, practical things on the ground. So we may want to think about metrics that make sense in a policy arena versus the technical world. For instance, counting how many NAPs have been developed, it doesn't really help a country adapt better, but it does help the political process here sort of look at are we progressing or not in terms of the success of countries in producing the plans. So to wrap it up, I think the narrative approach should be accompanied by perhaps a deeper explanation of what's going on underneath a systems approach, as we're calling it, so that we develop a deeper understanding of a theory of change, how things connect with each other. So whether you call it a nexus or you call it transboundary or whatever, that becomes inherent in the way that systems interact with each other. And so we're able to better understand how an action could actually penetrate the system and result in an outcome that's desirable. So that's some of the work we're doing. We hope that as we advance on this work, we'll collect more information and maybe case studies and examples that will be useful as we transition into the assessment of progress on NAPs. But I wanted to invite Alison now that leads this subgroup, perhaps, I don't know, do we have an extra chair? To add perhaps a more specific context to what I've been saying. So Alison is from UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, and she's been leading the discussions on this subgroup. So over to you, Alison.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Alison Lassiter. I'm a professor at University of Pennsylvania, and I co-lead the NAP tracking subgroup. So I'm going to give you a specific example of this idea of using Earth observations to track adaptation outcomes, which Paul mentioned briefly. For those of you who are not familiar, Earth observations is a term we use for data collected mostly by satellites. So this includes things like remotely sensed imagery, so pictures looking down on the Earth. And one of the things we've been asking is whether we can use Earth observations to witness or track, measure, and evaluate adaptation outcomes. So let me give you a specific example of that. We've been testing and evaluating this idea in the context of Malawi. And one of the indicators that we've been looking at is cropland area. So how much area is under agriculture? And one of the things we can do in the aerial imagery is track the area in agriculture over time. And so we can look at a particular sub-district and see that the amount of land in agriculture is going up, or we can see that there's trends going down. And one of the things we're starting to ask is this adaptation to see improvements in the amount of area under agriculture? Is it adaptation if we see that there's an extreme event? And is there loss in the amount of cropland area? Or is there sort of less loss than we would expect? Does the amount of cropland area improve quickly over time, or does it take a long time to rebound? So by tracking these numbers, we can start to witness responses, and this might help reveal adaptation. I'll have to say, though, we are very aware that not all adaptation can be witnessed through aerial images. And so one of the things we're trying to do is try to discover what can be witnessed and what can't be witnessed. How does this contribute to the conversation, and what are its limits? So that is under exploration right now. Is there anything else I should add there, Paul?
That's good. Maybe there'll be questions afterwards and we can interact.
Excellent. Thank
And you have an event 2 days from now, right? That you go to.
Yes, we'll be talking about this at the Higher Education Pavilion in Building 90 on December 10th, Sunday. We'll think about targets and indicators we can use in the water sector. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much also, Alison, for the presentation, also for supplementing. So we can now move quickly to experience sharing. We have colleagues here from Zambia and Bhutan. So I'll quickly turn to colleague, Mr. Joseph, to share the Zambia perspective. Joseph, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Joseph Mbinji. I'm currently leading the National Adaptation Planning process in Zambia. So this is a process which started in mid-2020 with the support from the Green Climate Fund and the Global Water Partnership as a delivery partner. So the process has evolved quite a lot, and by last month, we basically completed the planning process, and we managed to submit the National Adaptation Plan for Zambia to the UNFCCC. So that's a good success to us. So we've now joined a few countries in Africa that have developed or completed their NAPs. But now we are going to the second phase, which is supposed to be implementation. We had a two-phased approach. So the first phase focused on developing an overarching national adaptation plan, basically focusing on 9 priority sectors that were identified as the most impacted by climate change. And phase 2 narrows down to water sector NAP. So basically it's readiness for implementation. So this is the phase that we are supposed to start early next year. So it focuses on a few things. One of them, of course, is resource mobilization, because we cannot implement adaptation actions that have been identified in the water sector without, first of all, knowing how to go about mobilizing those resources. So we are completing a resource mobilization strategy that will give guidance where we could source funds, technical support, and different resources to enable implementation. But also, we are trying to use this opportunity to develop a strategic framework for building resilience in the water sector, and then a wide range of capacity issues to make the water sector have the capacity to implement national adaptation or adaptation actions basically in the water sector. So some of these capacity building interventions that we intend to do in the coming phase include issues of integrating adaptation in sector plans, as water sector plans, but also at subnational level development plans, and in annual budgets as a starting point, so that some of the adaptation fund actions can be financed using the central treasury or local resources. Then secondly, it's also an issue of trying to strengthen coordination among stakeholders in the water sector. So setting up coordination structures so that implementation becomes much easier. Then there's also the aspect of building capacity to package adaptation actions which are contained in the overall national adaptation plan, and how to package those into bankable project proposals to access funds from GCF, adaptation funds, and similar financing windows. And then there's also an element of building capacity to monitor and report progress on adaptation. So we hope we can learn from the PEG, too, how this is, happening in other, countries, how we can use that to monitor and maybe report progress on adaptation. But then the challenge we have is we would want, tracking to go down, to subnational level, to the lowest level as far as the community level. So how do we build capacity from there to, generate information and report upwards? So basically bottom-up approach. And then the other one is to look at issues of, tracking finance, to finance adaptation in the water sector. And then lastly, engaging the private sector, because this is also another group that requires a lot of capacity in terms of understanding adaptation issues and, trying to see what opportunities lie out there in terms of investment. So this is the phase that we are going into. So we'll be looking forward to learning from other countries who are ahead of us, but also to benefit from some of the tools that have been developed for monitoring, for tracking, and so on. So I will end there. I don't have much time. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Joseph, for sharing with us the experience from Zambia. So we can now move to the next country we have here, at least to share their experience from Bhutan. Tenzin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and a very good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm myself Tenzin from Department of Water. With regard to our NAP experience in Bhutan, of course, in terms of the proposals setting, it started way back in 2016, but the NAP was actually, the project was launched in 2019, and it took us like almost almost 4 years to develop the whole Bhutan NAP. But what we did was, I think, when we were trying to develop the NAP, Bhutan NAP, we were trying to do the assessments, because when you're doing the assessment, we felt it that we were not limiting to the lack of data also, because if you really do the assessment for NAP, we need a lot of information, but some of the information is not available. So what we did was, instead of having the real science-based information, what we did was we tried to do a lot of socio-economic aspects assessment, where we went to the grassroots level, we were discussing with the community, hearing their stories, their narratives, and what was the situation. So from there, we were able to try to get a lot of information. So our approach was in terms of doing the top-down aspects, right, from the climate data, based on the global data, and then looking at the localities and getting the localities information. So it was more of a combination of top-down and bottom-up approach. And through this, ultimately, we were able to come up with the Bhutan's NAP. And we have already launched Bhutan NAP. Almost like 4 months back, we have launched a document on Bhutan's NAP. But what we did was, instead of having the NAP being developed and then waiting for another project proposal to develop, while doing the NAP preparation for Bhutan's NAP, we already knew where are the areas that we need to focus. And doing that, we have already started developing other projects for that. And then while we are in the process of developing Bhutan's NAP, we have already exited to get funding support for the adaptation projects through the JEF, LDCF, and through the Adaptation Fund. And we have already, the project has been approved, and we have already started implementing these 2 projects. It's not much, it's just made 3 months old. We have already implementing these projects. One is for the Expos project with the JEF, LDCF. Another one is with the Adaptation Fund. Totally focused on adaptation aspects, but focusing more on the water sector. And while doing this, we also started with a national program, which is called Water Flagship Program. So when we are trying to design the water flagship for Bhutan, we are trying to assess this not as a sector-wise, but in a very holistic approach. And here we are trying to see that water, when you're trying to design the discussions, we started looking from the source aspects in a very integrated, holistic manner. So right from the source aspects and who are the users and the quality assurance and the governance aspects. This is how we have framed it in a very integrated manner. And based on this, then we are trying to develop the project proposal. So the 2 projects that we have, which have been approved from the JEF, LDCF, and the Adaptation Fund Secretariat, it's done in a very integrated fashion. So what I'm saying is that while we wait for the NAP to be launched, while we are trying to develop the NAP project and wait for its launching, in the meantime, we know where are the areas that we need to focus and time to ensure that I think we are ahead of the time. We started developing proposal, and that's how we started. So our experience too is like, I think we should not only wait for the NAP development and its launching, but in the meantime, you know where you need to focus, and you can already kick-starting developing this project. So that's how we did it. And now we are already developing another project for the water projects, like through the JEF from the Green Climate Fund. So what I'm saying is like, I think instead of waiting for the NAP to be launched, we know what are the areas we need to work on it, and then start preparing for the project proposal and develop that. That's what I'd like to share to you all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Tanzim, and also to Joseph for sharing. So I think the panelists deserve a round of applause, please. Yes, indeed, it's a unique experience. I think we've learned from Bhutan and also from that of Zambia. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a presentation from the technical subgroup, of course, that has to do with the NAP tracking by Paul and also supplemented by Alison. And also we made, of course, experience from our colleagues here from Bhutan and Zambia. So I would like to open the floor for some few questions, clarifications, or reflection. Okay. We have a colleague here from Togo. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation of experience of from Bhutan. So I have one question for you. I would like to know at which extent the socio-economic studies that you have conducted in order to overcome the lack of scientific data. I would like to know in which extent these studies have helped you to comprehend the impact, the risk of climate change at an historical level and also for the protection. How have you managed those studies in order to conduct appropriate risk and impact vulnerability studies to develop them? I'm sorry I haven't been able to look at your NAP yet, but I will do it this night in order to complement. But I would like to know to share with us how those studies have helped you to conduct scientific climate risk analysis. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Togo? Okay, I think we are fine. So I can now go to my colleague from Bhutan to respond.
Thank you for the question from Togo, and I hope I will be able to do justice by explaining how we could able to achieve NAP by doing the socio-economic assessment. From Bhutan, like how we have started working is like, as I said, due to the lack of the scientific data, so we did two approaches. One is top-down approaches and one is bottom-up approaches. And the top-down approach is more or less focused on the available scientific information that we had and also from the global data, where we did the climate risk assessment based on the observed information, both from historical information that we can get it from the GCF model. So we did the analysis and then we are trying to see what could be the projected impact in the short term, medium term, long term. That's based on the limited scientific information that we have data. But in the meantime, when you are going down the grassroots level, we have designed a questionnaires, and where they have a list of questions in terms of, for example, if I just give a scenario, let's talk about water. So in that community, there's water resources, and we are trying to say, in terms of what was the water scenario in 5 years, 10 years before, what is now? So in that sort of questions we develop, and we are trying to hear from that story from the community. And we are trying to, when we are discussing with the community, we went from the different age gap. The elderly person who knows much more, has the better memories of what was the past incident, then at least the mid-level, and at least maybe at the young, at somewhere at the adulthood level also. So we have, in terms of age gapping to get the information. So that's how we did the question assessment. And then after we have collected the socio-economic assessment, then we are trying to analyze it, and then trying to see what is being analyzed from the scientific information. Does it matches or not? So somehow we found it that, I'll not say 100%, but almost like 70%, 80%, it was time to click it based on the scientific information, available data, and then what we are hearing from the grassroots level is somehow we were able to click the scenario. So that's why I think we felt that it was more or less, the result was more or less promising. And when we do the discussions, definitely we went to the when you talk the grassroots level, local government level, we are not trying to only discuss with the government bureaucrats. We are going with the communities who have been affected and who have been sharing their stories, and we are hearing from that. So we went right to the lowest level in terms of hearing the stories, and that's how we were able to come up during the actual climate risk assessment.
Yes, I think thank you very much for the detailed explanation and response to the question. So, Joseph, do you have any final reflection before we close this session?
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe just to see that some similarities with Bhutan, we equally had challenges with information, except for us, it was mainly with regard to baseline. We did get support, technical support from the global NAP to develop the MEO framework for the Zambia National Adaptation Plan. But one of the challenges we had was to set baseline for some of the for some of the indicators. So that still remains a challenge. But the other issue is basically, I hope this scope can help come up with some form of a framework on the global goal and adaptation, so that it becomes easy for countries to plug in to be able to report progress towards achievement of the global goal and adaptation. At the moment, it's a bit of a challenge, We can do monitoring report at output level, but how do we aggregate at a higher level and be able to also report to see how much contribution we are making towards the global goal adaptation. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Joseph, and thank you, Tazim, for sharing your experience. So maybe we can give them another round of applause at least. Okay, so you can take your seat while I try to call on a colleague from the indigenous knowledge that's going to share, of course, her experience with us. Siosinamali Liu. Okay. So as was presented by our colleague Leg, a member, we have 4 subgroups, but because of time, we cannot present on all of the subgroups. But it's worth noting that during our engagements with the LDCs and also during our NAP Expos, we do provide some insights on the work of the subgroups. So, ladies and gentlemen, the leg has been engaging, of course, on activities on NAPs related to gender, youth, private sector, the national and subnational authorities with support from our multi-stakeholder forum at our various events and technical guardians. So, and that's the more reason for this event. And we invited, of course, a colleague to share with us from the local communities and indigenous people, to also share with us some best practices, and of course, at this particular session. And then also I will try to call and turn on to Paul to also share with us some insights on the NAP Data Initiative before we close for the day. So with that, I want to give the floor to Madam Siosinamali Liu, at least to share some experience. I know maybe I did not get it clearly, but you can help me with that. You have the floor, please.
Thank you. Whawhtai tele lava, whatalo whātul pa ia mana mamalu o apotopoto mai nei fiafi. Warm greetings from the Pacific. My name is Siosinamali Liu. I am Samoan, and I work for the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program in the Pacific. I work specifically in the climate traditional knowledge space, and I am very privileged to sit here before you and share some of the insights from the Pacific. If I can ask, if you can put up my slides. So while the team is putting up the slides, first of all, I would like to acknowledge all the governments and the countries from the Pacific, because it is their work that I'll be presenting here today. Also, I acknowledge the traditional knowledge holders, the elders, whose knowledge has allowed many of our Pacific communities to survive despite the difficult circumstances that we live through to this day. In the Pacific, just for some, to set the scene and also provide a context, most of the people in the Pacific are indigenous. That means we own our lands, we govern our own countries, and we also have, we are the traditional custodians of our lands and resources. Also, in the Pacific, many of our islands are spread across from east to west and north to south. A lot of our communities are very isolated. Some of you are very familiar with the globe, with a map, with a world map, and you can see that most of the Pacific is carved up in half, where one is at the other end, and most of our islands are not even seen or visible on that map. So today I won't be talking about the NAPA process. I think you are the experts. What I'll be sharing with you are examples from the Pacific around indigenous knowledge. You may ask, what role or how does traditional knowledge, what value does it bring to the NAPA process? In the Pacific, many of our leaders, many of our government officials belong to a community. They belong to an island. They also participate in the decision making, whether it is at the national level or the provincial level. They in fact belong to a place. And that has allowed many of the decision making to flow from the government level to the community level. Many of our governments, we have traditional governance structures that is being recognized by our governments. In fact, many of our islands have village laws or village bylaws. And our governance systems in many of Pacific Islands relies a lot on our traditional governance systems. And that's because when you have thousands of islands spread across, you can't have resources, you can't have politicians, you can't have policemen, you can't have every government agency placed in these remote locations. Locations that takes more than 3 or 4 days for you to travel to. So these are some of the challenges that our Pacific communities face, hence why there's been this, our traditional governance systems has worked well and has been integrated into a lot of our planning processes. So when it comes to engagement, when it comes to national adaptation processes, the government systems already work together with our traditional chiefs, our traditional knowledge holders, and also many of our subgroupings, for example, the Women's Committee, because often at the community level, it is the different subgroups that tend to manage the resources. They are also the first groups that respond when we face extreme events or challenges brought on by increasing sea level. Also in the Pacific, we have many traditional concepts, traditional knowledge or indigenous concepts that is part of the process, of the development process when it comes to development of NAPAs. We have in Samoa, for example, the concept of soala pule. This is a consensus decision-making process where it's a group decision-making processes where decision-making and where both decision-making and accountability is shared. And this is done both at the highest level, whether it be the national level or at the community level. The photos that you see are some of the NAPs that have already been developed in the Pacific. In fact, if you go through a lot of these NAPs, you will not come across, there is mention of traditional knowledge, of traditional governance systems, but it does not explicitly mention or go into details outlining these very unique and often integrate systems that has allowed a lot of these NAPA development processes from the showcasing how decisions is made and shared from top down to and also in reverse. We also have concepts such as Vatapuia. Now these are concepts of sacred space in the Pacific. As I mentioned in my introductory comments, everyone belongs to a place. So for us, Vatapuia, it's a concept that speaks of space, of interrelations, how we relate to each other, how we relate to the space that we occupy. It also speaks of how we interact, the rules of engagement. These are some of the concepts that in the Pacific, it may have a different terminology ranging from subgroup to subgroup, but the concept is the same, and that's because within the Pacific, we are isolated, we have limited resources, and we continuously are being challenged by extreme events. As we sit here, we face another cyclone, and that is the third cyclone just within the last 4 weeks. These events continue to impact a lot of our communities. So Vata Puia, these are the concepts that governs how we respond, how we manage the limited resources that we have. And also it speaks to how we manage our knowledge systems, traditional knowledge systems. And these are the knowledge system pertaining to how we can predict events by observing our environment. Many of our Pacific islands, we rely on our ecosystems because they are the first indicators. Our environments respond to the changes in climate. They can already predict some of the climate or weather events that will happen before we even face it or before our national Met services pick it up. As mentioned by the speaker from Bhutan, the value of traditional knowledge when you don't have enough scientific knowledge in place, when you have islands that are spread across vast ocean, we don't have enough monitoring equipment to even monitor the ocean conditions. We don't have enough equipment to monitor weather, rainfall, and therefore we have to rely on our indigenous knowledge to help address that gap. Yet in a lot of our national adaptation plans, it does not reflect the contribution that our traditional knowledge can contribute. It also does not fully capture the contribution that these knowledge systems can bring to the table. I have here on screen some of the engagement processes in the knowledge systems and in the concepts in the Pacific. We already engage many of our different groupings. These processes are very inclusive, from elders to young, to the youth and young women, to people with living disabilities. Everyone in society in the Pacific are consulted. Also, their priorities get written down, are recognized, and become part of reports. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I can only share examples from the Pacific, but I do know that indigenous peoples all around the world have a lot more to contribute to our adaptation programs. Our indigenous knowledge hold a lot of the solutions that are still valid to this day, and hopefully can become part of the NAP processes in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liu, for sharing, of course, such a very useful intervention. I think it's really mind-blowing. That takes me back, I think, some time ago when we were trying to work on Sierra Leone NAP, when Rene asked me about how we could integrate indigenous people and, of course, the local communities. Thank you very much. I think that is very useful. Of course, countries have learned, and think since the NAP itself is a living document, so I think going forward when it comes to the iterative, to updating NAPs, country can now know how they could also learn from what you've already said. So thank you again. So with that said, we still have some time. So I just want to quickly turn to Paul from the Secretariat, because we have various initiatives in which from the leg we try to support the LDC countries. So with that, Paul, you have the floor to share some quick highlights on the NAP data initiative.
Thank you, Chair. I'll spend just 2 minutes. My colleague Matsomi was supposed to present this, but he's tied up in the negotiations. Many of you have heard about the NAP Data Initiative that the lake has been doing and showcasing during the NAP Expos and so forth. It's basically an attempt to address one of the major gaps and needs that LDCs have expressed, and other countries for that matter. It's the issue of access to data to inform assessments, to inform the planning, prioritization, the M&D, and so forth. And it goes beyond the climate data needs that perhaps WMO has so adequately provided and supported countries in doing their climate rationale and all of that. What the lake has been doing is to assemble all of that in a geospatial platform, in a GIS system online to basically allow every country to access the best available data and integrate that straight into their NAP document, also linking to various other data sources, whether it's the World Bank, FAO, and so forth. And most organizations now are making their data available directly on the web for other programs to query directly. And that's the technology that the lake is utilizing to tap into the best available, most up-to-date data that's available out there, and using various web technologies, including GitHub and RStudio, et cetera, those of you that know what I'm talking about. But it's basically the best available tools out there to enable integration of all of this data into a system that the NAP team can use and utilize without having to invest a lot of effort into the technology that's required to make any of this work on your own. So we are going to be doing more workshops in the NAP conclusions. Last week, there is a reminder to the lake and the adaptation committee to conduct its training activities that were mandated a few years back, and this is perhaps one of the activities that the lake will be doing during the next NAP Expo is to basically train countries in how to use these data tools. Although we didn't talk about the guidelines for implementation, just some of you in the room are involved in that. The lake continues to further develop that, and we'll be in touch with the various partners and organizations to advance this work, and hopefully in time for the next lake meeting in end of February, so we'll have a full draft. This is an opportunity to expand on the activities that countries are doing after you complete your NAP, and how do you then turn that into project proposals for funding, either through GF, GCF, Adaptation Fund, but also other sources of funding. And it links nicely to the mapping of finance publication that the lake has just produced. It's a way to help countries access funding that is available already. So they're not asking for new monies. The money is there, but the challenge also is how to access that funding. And I think that's a song that's been sung over the last decades about how difficult it is to access funding, and we do need to find new and better ways of helping countries access money. I know there are colleagues in the room that have worked in the GCF many times. This is a problem that you have been trying to solve with increased technical assistance, but we do need to make sure that the countries are aware of it and can take advantage, and I think that's where the lake comes in convening the countries with the partners that are able to provide them support to make sure that they do access support that's available to them and can make progress. So thank you, Chair. I know that time is running, so I'll give you a chance to perhaps open up the floor.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I think we still have some few minutes. So if there is any question or reflection to the oral reports from Paul, I think the floor is open.
Maybe I can ask the audience a question, since
Okay.
you're all comfortable in your seats. Somebody referred to the assessment of progress on NAPs next year. What is the one measure that you would propose we look at to assess whether we're making progress? Bear in mind that any metric does need to inform further action. It needs to help address the problem that exists. So it's not enough to say a NAP submitted. If it's not submitted, then we need to be able to uncover why not and where is the obstacle and so forth. So if you had to think broadly, what is the one thing that each of you would propose to be the question to be answered during that assessment that would help us advance on NAP's adaptation more broadly?
Okay.
Thank you very much. Maybe one of the things that come into my mind is the estimation, the cost estimation of adaptation measures or actions into the NAPs, because it has come up that countries are lacking scientific methodology to estimate the costs of adaptation measures. And even the ARCs of the IPCC has highlighted that there is not a scientific methodology that is used by countries in order to estimate how much they need in order to for the implementation of their NAPs.
Okay. All right. So pass the mic around because we need just 1 point from each person. So we have 5 minutes left. Okay. So let's try to get as many responses. So good point.
Any other points?
Give the mic to anybody looking down.
Behind you. Yeah.
Okay, Julie.
And Julia.
Thank you, Paul. I'm Julie from UNDP. To me, because of the objectives of the NAP on reducing vulnerability and the other one on mainstreaming, one aspect would be to look at whether adaptation has been mainstreamed into development plans, budgets, etc.
Okay. So what would be the exact thing we would look out for, though?
Well, yeah, I guess we'd have to select a set of documents, be it sectoral or national, in terms of the national development plan or some of the key sectors that are identified as priorities for the countries, and see how much of adaptation is actually integrated into those documents, for instance, or budget submissions, for instance, and looking at whether adaptation is included in, or adaptation measures rather, are included in those budget submissions at national and sectoral level, and local level as well.
We'll follow up on that later because I think it needs to go beyond just a word search in documents to see whether have you mentioned a NAP or not. I think it does need to be more concrete than what has been done in the past, but good point. Keep the guy behind.
Julia. Oh, okay.
Just very briefly, I would like to support the previous point as one of the important elements perhaps, but I would also like to stress that perhaps there is no one metric, although I very much understand that you're asking for that, Paul. Perhaps we need various metrics, but thank you so much for this question.
No, I meant one each from a person, not that it's the one measure, but each one to propose one, but yeah. But definitely, yeah, there's no one measure that captures it all, for sure.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul, for this question. My name is Julia Wolf from FAO. I think it would be extremely helpful to know of the already submitted NAPs, what are the priorities that actually went the next step in terms of implementation? No? So that would be linking the submitted NAPs to ongoing or incoming measures. No? That can be projects, that can be national action. So some kind of reflection how the country has been moving forward, which is starting with mainstreaming, but then it's also going to really how you quantitatively and qualitatively yourself see the next step into implementation. That would be extremely important for us to know.
Yeah, maybe just sorry from UNDP. How many how many financial institutions, investors, and financiers have expressed interest in your NAP priorities?
Thank you. What I'd say is it would be good to have a look to see, for instance, to what extent adaptation has been mainstream. And I think this was a point that was raised by Julie before, how much this has been mainstreamed into the budgeting processes. But also to complement that with the reporting that countries are doing, for instance, under the SDGs or other similar UN framework, and to identify what are they reporting on where adaptation is concerned. Because you've in the first part of today's session, there was a mention that I think at least 7 LDCs have not yet developed a NAP. But I think we also have to recognize that based on your own evidence prior, that pretty much all developing countries are already engaged in an adaptation planning process, and they're doing it to a certain extent. So we have to bear in mind that there is implementation already taking place, and try to assess where that progress is being tracked and how it's being reported, so we can understand what the true adaptation landscape looks like. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Good to see everyone. Jason Spenceley with the Jeff, formerly worked with others at the Green Climate Fund on adaptation planning support. It's great to see all the progress. Thank you so much to the colleagues that presented. Paul, it's a really good question, actually. So in addition to the good points that colleagues made, because adaptation planning needs to take place in every corner of society, right, at every level. How about how much municipal governments, state, provincial governments, so subnational businesses are developing adaptation plans? They might not call them maps. They might call them something else. But how much of them are doing adaptation planning so that so an indicator that identifies how much adaptation planning is being infused into every corner of society?
Yeah, thank you. So, Paul?
Is anybody familiar then with maybe survey instruments that have done a similar analysis? Otherwise, perhaps the leg can work with AAC to develop an instrument, a survey instrument, long before next year's assessment work to kind of tease out and gather the information that you all are referring to, because that information is not in the NAP. We're not going to be able to discover who and who is addressing adaptation, how it's being mainstreamed, etc. But it might be an interesting exercise to gather that information as widely as possible. Yes, Christine? Of course, creating more work for the groups, but they have to, of course, okay it.
Thanks so much. I wanted to ask, because there are a number of countries that have an app that they haven't submitted yet, I wanted to ask what you see as the reasons that countries aren't submitting their NAPs, like Jordan, Palau in the way, Cook Islands. Is there anything that we can do as technical agencies to encourage more NAPs that are in place to be submitted? Thank you.
I think that from where we sit, it's mostly just talking to the focal points and others and encouraging them to share it, and most are quite willing to do so. It's not that they don't want to share it, it's just they never thought about the value of doing so. But please do help and encourage countries that have a NAP to share it. There's now an invitation to developed countries as well to share their NAPs. So I think the mood now is to share as much as you can so that others can learn from what you're doing. So thanks for that. Over to you,
Okay, thank you, Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, we've now come to the end of this side event. So if you have any further questions or reflection, we can engage bilaterally, because we just have some few, of course, seconds to end this session. So please join me in thanking all the speakers. Of course, some of them have left because of some reasons, but on behalf of the leg, we are very much happy, at least for the week's exchanges. And also to you all, thank you very much for making your time to attend, and we hope to see you